Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a viewer replay from MiNameIsJager, who I'm pretty sure I've had on the channel before. This is a ranked game and he is in the Thunderer, which of course means he'll exclusively be shooting 18-inch HE shells with an absolutely filthy fire chance. Or at least that's what I would normally be saying for most people in a Thunderer, or so it feels like. There's a very good chance that if you meet a Thunderer in battle, they will be flinging those HE shells, much like the Conqueror, which doesn't have quite as big guns, but does have more barrels and also has an equally filthy fire chance, although slightly less than the absurd, what is it, like 63% on Thunderer? It's pretty ridiculous. And you will see some HE usage in this game, but actually it's going to be against most of the larger targets, shall we say, the AP shells, almost exclusively the AP shells, right until pretty much the very end. So you're basically going to see somebody using what ideally would be the sensible mix of both AP and HE. But of course, if you give people a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, and so if you give people 18-inch HE shells with an absurd fire chance that can do lots and lots of damage and set lots of fires at the same time, well then it's no surprise that people are going to use that quite a lot. Is it wargaming? It's one of those times when whatever was down on their design document didn't really mesh up with what players then actually went and did. And to be fair, I mean, it's hardly the only tale like that from the world of gaming generally. People will sit down and think, okay, players, well, we'll give them these tools and they'll use these tools in such and such a way. And then, of course, players actually go, ooh, this thing is, good for all seasons, or, this thing is clearly overpowered compared to the rest, or whatever. And so, yeah, that's what ends up getting used. Although, I don't know if you would call the HE overpowered exactly, so much as kind of immensely annoying. It can be overpowered in some situations, because it basically negates any armour that you might have. But you can also potentially make the argument that the 18.1-inch AP shells of the Yamato basically serve the same purpose, that they pretty much will punch through anything by virtue of overmatch. Now there is a Conqueror on the enemy team, and this is actually an interesting contrast, because this enemy Conqueror is going to indeed be one of those players that exclusively uses the HE shell and chooses not to ever think about ammo choice at all. They just go for the low-hanging fruit and probably are doing worse because of it than if they use their ammo more intelligently. But having said doing worse because of it doesn't necessarily mean doing badly, and the exact same could be said for the Thunderer. If Jaeger had been using exclusively high explosive, they still probably would have done a fair bit of damage, but maybe not quite as much. You can see he's got the quick changeover skill. I can't remember what that's called now. Is it expert loader? Or I honestly can't remember. But yeah, it's very, very handy if you have a target like a destroyer pop up, and especially if it's one that doesn't have smoke and is doing things like running into islands in a bit of a panic, as it seems like. And it does rather seem like their Shima should have the absolute advantage here, but that's not going to quite work out how how one would expect. It certainly didn't work out how I expected, with the Shima disengaging and cloaking up. No, the Shima is actually, despite this Marceau having run themselves aground, the Shima's actually going to end up dying first somehow. Although I can't, I'm not going to completely fault the Shima for choosing to use their guns, because too often it is the opposite. It is Japanese destroyer players by and large choosing not to use their guns, even though your guns still very much work. But in this case it wasn't a good exchange. The Marceau has got very fast firing 5-inch guns that are basically going to make fairly quick work of you if you're in something like a Shima at close range. If you're further away and you've got more chance of dodging, then yes, but if you're further away, then I guess the opposite goes as well, because the Marceau is rather fast. Anyway, Jaeger is pretty much just sailing around in the middle. Each team is basically split into two, but Jaeger really does have probably the best position of anybody with heavy firepower right now, because you've got in the south the enemy Schlieffen being chased down by 3 ships. You've got Jaeger and the rapidly disintegrating Shima over here, and then on the other flank you've got that Nevsky a little bit to the north, and then the Ohio is pretty much in the mirror position of the Schlieffen and getting heavily focused by those 4 ships. But this is giving potentially Jaeger a really nice crossfire, although he's probably, now that this Shima is out of the way, or that has been taken out of the equation, and that the Marceau could potentially, I think, stealth torp him. I don't think it has much of a stealth torp range if you fully spec for stealth, but honestly I haven't played it enough to really remember if that's the case or not. Certainly the French destroyers, you can make pretty much what are called lighthouse builds. Not quite true lighthouse builds where you're I don't think it's possible on many ships, but where you're basically pretty much always spotted. I can't remember which ship it was in testing we had for a while, but it was a true lighthouse build where your surface detection could be made higher than your actual firing range. So yeah, that was fun. I have a feeling Wargaming adjusted it, and I can't remember which destroyer it was, and this is obviously going back a ways, but yeah. Anyway, so that was a little random trip down memory lane. So yeah, he does have the Marceau's torpedoes to worry about, and those 2 battleships now potentially are going to be focusing him as well. He can't really get unspotted with the Marceau blocking the cap still. However, with the Schlieffen also taken out on the southern side of the map, he now ought to have a little help from his allies, and 2 of them are radar cruisers. I don't think the Nevsky is going to be in range to actually radar the Marceau, although you never know, but the Stalingrad may well. Now that enemy Conqueror, despite the positioning and manoeuvring or whatever, will continue to just fully fire high explosive the entire time. So that's what I was talking about, that contrast. And it's also not angling particularly well themselves. Back when it very first came out, you could pretty much quite comfortably afford to sit and do this in the Conqueror. It was really, really hard to Citadel, but fortunately that was changed. Jaeger himself does have to worry maybe a bit about getting burned down. He's got plenty of heals, but with the fire chance on the Conqueror, of course, he has to maybe worry about getting burned down before he can get heals and damage controls on the go. And he's actually angling to try and not give broadside. I think even though this Conqueror hasn't really given any indication of using anything other than high explosive, he's unwilling to trust in that, and maybe you know, could have safely slipped in between the southern gap between those islands a little bit sooner, where he was kind of aimed for, but it's not going to matter as it turns out, but because between his own fire and his allies' fire, in fact, there we go, it's actually the Yoshino that finishes them off, that Conqueror goes down. The Conqueror was making absolutely no move to disengage. They could have withdrawn, pulled back and tried to get a heal going, but they just kept plonking away, and now it is just the enemy Yamato left alone. And although there was very little chance of the Conqueror and the Yamato winning this against the 4 ships on comprising Jaeger's team, the chances of the Yamato somehow taking it are even less. There's basically no way in hell this Yamato is going to win at this point. So although we almost had a mirror situation with the north and the south, developing with the Ohio in the northwest and the Schlieffen in the southeast. It was really the presence of Jaeger in the middle and farming those cruisers and doing damage to those battleships in that crossfire position that I think really did make the difference in this game. So in a way they got a little bit lucky with the enemy destroyer being a Marceau compared to their own Shima, but as it turned out, you know, the Marceau did actually live rather longer than the Shima did. And maybe so, you know, the fact that Jaeger was able to take advantage of that was fine, but it was maybe not that big of a factor at the end of things. I mean, that maybe gave him the confidence to take that more central position to begin with. Anyway, we're in the final stages. The Yoshino looks like they're going to move up to maybe get the torpedo finisher, and the Yamato understandably going for the closer target with the torpedoes, but then the Yoshino decides, you know what, I am the torpedo, and so that's going to be the final kill and the win. 200k damage, high caliber, and a Confederate award there, so pretty good performance overall, especially considering that 200k came out of fewer ships than normal. Nearly 2700 base XP, which is very creditable, and overall, yeah, that was a pretty solid round, and that positioning in the middle ended up really working out. And of course we got to see some intelligent use of ammunition in a Thunderer, and that might be the rarest sight of all, or something, I don't know. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed this replay, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.